Hello and welcome everyone to episode 2 of Mile High Mana. I'm here with Lee Wilson. We've recorded a previous episode. If you get the chance, please go ahead and check that out. We are going to be continuing the series. I know last week Lee and I sort of talked about how often we wanted to do this, and we received some really good feedback from the folks that had listened. So thank you to all of you that both listened and gave us some feedback here. So we got another really packed agenda today, more packed than the first one. I'm sure we're going to be running well over the hour mark. But that's okay. I think we're excited to have these conversations here. But we do have a bit of a success over the weekend. Lee, I'll go ahead and flip it to you if you want to tell the audience what you accomplished.
I don't know how much of an accomplishment it is, but it was fun. I played at the standard RCQ at Mythic Games in Littleton, which is honestly one of my favorite stores. I've always had a really good time playing RCQs there. Those guys do a really good job of running a tournament. I think we had 22 or 24 players, so not a huge crowd, but started right on time. The night before, I had put together the mono red deck that Theo Zhang had played, and I was doing a bunch of sample hands, like sitting at my desk and going through, and like I just didn't feel as good about it as the Gruul deck that I'd been playing the weeks before. I just felt like it didn't have any mana sinks, and if you ever got to your fourth or fifth land, you kind of died. So I pivoted back and I sleeved up the Gruul deck that I had played at the team event a couple of weeks ago. I just made one minor change in that I cut Questing Druid from the deck entirely, which is something I had seen a player from Brazil do at the Pro Tour who had, I think he went 7-3 and constructed. And honestly, I love Questing Druid as a card. I've played it a bunch, but it didn't feel great in the deck. It just felt like you either took turn 2 off, which is one of the most explosive turns that the deck has to play it, or you kind of played it late and you kind of basically had to take an entire turn off to play it on your opponent's end step and then untap and do a bunch of stuff. So I was happy to cut it. Um,
We've been
and
cutting that card in a lot of formats lately.
I mean, we cut it in Legacy when you went to Chicago, and I was like, well, if you can cut it in Legacy, I could probably cut it from my standard deck. Like, the deck already had plenty of cards to play. Like, it was playing 2 of this and 3 of this, and it was like, there was like enough good cards to play that I didn't need to play it. And I kind of had also wanted to play Sentinel of the Nameless City. It's a card that I'd never played with, but I'd seen a bunch of different cards, or I'm sorry, a bunch of different players play that card at the Pro Tour, either in their main deck or in their sideboard. And I thought it lined up specifically well against Ride's End, of which there was a whole bunch of in the format. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna give it a shot. And in the mirror, obviously, it's a beast in the mirrors.
Before we hop into the round results here, Lee, I wanted to just sort of highlight a couple things that you mentioned. So you talked about the team event that we did playing Standard. You also have taken a really pointed focus into Standard in the past 6 to 9 months. Before we hop into your results and everything, can you walk us through your mindset and like some of the successes you've seen previously in both the RCQ level and team event level? That way, just the listener can sort of understand the skill level you had before the Standard event, just so they have an idea of where you were at.
Yeah, sure. I guess fair enough. So as soon as the red creatures got released in Bloomburrow, all of them basically, which is like the whole deck is basically Bloomburrow block constructed. I've been playing every single variant that I could. So I started out playing the mono red deck after Quintonoli had a good finish at Worlds. I then pivoted to playing the Leyline of Resonance variants after that card released, and tried all those variants. Then I went over to Gruul as a way to fight against the kind of blue-black control decks that were kind of running standard at the time. I think the best decks, when I first picked up the Gruul iteration, were kind of like a Dimir mid-range, kind of before the Pixie deck was brought onto the scene. And then I continued to play it through when we went to Atlanta to play in the Spotlight Series in January. I played Gruul both days there. And then I've been basically, iterating on the deck for every single format. I'm sorry, every single tournament in the format. And honestly, I've played a lot. I've probably played more standard this last year than I've played in a decade. I think the last time I played serious standard was when we were casting Siege Rhino. Last time we did Tarkir. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I've really played nothing else but the red decks in all the different variants.
Very cool. Yeah, and you've definitely put in a ton of work since Bloomberg released. And I think the play style of the Gruul deck, the mono red deck, and then we tried the Boros Sheltered by Mice deck or whatever you want to call it. We tried a lot in that red space. So I think you put in a ton of work on this, and it's good to see like you've had multiple RCQ top eights at this point, and then we've had multiple team event top fours. And I think that this is sort of a culmination of your efforts. Obviously, it wasn't a two slaughter, it was a one slaughter. But yeah, I'll pass the torch back over to you if you want to walk through each step round by round.
Yeah, I won't bore everybody to death, but round one, I played against Justin, who's a guy I've played with a couple of times before. He and his friend Grayson have been working on this mono blue tempo deck for basically the entirety of the season. It's really just a combination of like cheap flyers, a bunch of tempo stuff like Bloom Trick and Aetherize and stuff, and the really good two drop Flood Pit's Drowner, and then Enduring Curiosity and Kaito to draw cards. So just like your stereotypical pure mono blue tempo deck. Games were close. Games were fun. I did lose game 2 to him copying my Hired Claw twice with 2 Mockingbirds and beating me down on the play. So that was kind of entertaining, but I pulled that one out 2-1 in round 1. Round 2, I got paired down into the Boros Mice deck that you just mentioned earlier, which is really just the same cards that I play, but splashing white for Sheltered by Ghosts. And I just got completely annihilated. Like, I lost the die roll. I mulliganed game 1. He ends up playing like multiple threats into Sheltered by Ghosts, which is like almost unbeatable.
Typical pair down stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Basically unbeatable. And then game 2, same thing. He basically just had a really good draw, kept 7, and had multiple Sheltered by Ghosts on turn 3 and 4. And I basically just scooped him up. The good part about that is I had time to like take a break, go walk outside for half an hour. Like, I think our match was over in like 12 minutes. So that was a quick loss to go 1-1. I get paired into a player I've never played before, but he was playing a Bant Collector Cage deck, kind of similar to what Doomwake played at the Spotlight series in Atlanta, but he was splashing blue for Mockingbird and I think some sort of permission, although I didn't get to see it. Unfortunately, my deck just like drew 7 cards, perfect runouts, and it was a pretty easy 2-0. I kind of ran him over. He was just, too many tap lands and stuff. His deck didn't come together. So I was 2-1 at that point. Then I got paired into Domain Zur Overlords, which it was a matchup I was prepared to play. I actually had changed my sideboard and included 4 copies of Sunspine Links into my sideboard. So I was more than prepared for the Domain matchup. That kind of went as expected. I was able to win game 1 on the draw, which felt pretty good. I just had a nice turn 2 Manifold Mouse that he wasn't able to interact with into turn 3 Monstrous Rage and a bunch of damage. So I end up winning that match 2-1. I lost game 2 on the draw to multiple temporary lockdowns, which is just the best card against the Mice deck. It cleans up Innkeeper's Talent. It cleans up everything you put on the board. And, if they ever have multiple of those into Zur, you're probably in trouble. And that's kind of how that turned out. But was able to win game 3 off a pretty good hand. I kept in a Witchstalker Frenzy just to have another answer for Zur if it ever came to that, even though it's really not a great answer. But I did attack with Screaming Nemesis. He attempted to cast Ride Down on it, and I was able to Witchstalker Frenzy my own Nemesis to dome him for 5 and shut off his life gain, which was pretty sweet. First time I've ever been able to do that in paper, so that was cool. And then there was a bunch of talk about drawing in or doing all this or that, but you know how I am. Like, I like to be first seed if I can, playing this Gruul deck. So I decided to play round 5. The breakers were a little sketchy as well. I get paired into Gruul Leyline, which is actually a pretty rough matchup. I think they're just faster than you, and you don't ever have enough interaction to stop them. I was listening to Lucas Dukow, who is Duke 12 on Magic Online, who top 8 of the Pro Tour, and he stated that as his reason to play the Leyline deck at the Pro Tour, as he felt very favored in the in the pseudo mirrors. But I was able to pull that out in 3 games. They were super close. Game 2, I lost because I didn't block his Heartfire hero, and he ended up doing 16 to me with a combination of Monstrous Rage plus a Burn Together. So that was rough, but I ended up winning that match in the 3rd game. And then I was 4-1 and I was top of the standings, which is really nice because both Joe Nunez and Nick Diryu, who we had talked about in the previous episode, they were the 3-0s and they decided to double draw in top 8. So I was the only guy with 12 points, which was nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. I just think it's important. Like, when I first started playing RCQs to just like do this, like my goal was like, I just want to top 8 to give myself a chance. Now, when I play these events, like I'm really trying to win and get the slot. And I think like for at least me personally, I was talking to Tommy about this because he had come by the shop and we were chatting in between rounds. I was like, look, like I could potentially draw at the last round, but I would rather just like take my shot at round 5. If I win, I'm number 1 in the standings. And if I lose, I get to go home. Right. And to me, those are like 2 fine outcomes, as opposed to like staying there and trying to play on the draw for 3 rounds. So anyway, I was happy with that. In the quarterfinals, I get paired against Justin's friend Grayson on the same mono blue deck. So I knew exactly what I was playing around and through. Like the first round I had played against Justin, he got me with an Aetherize. You know what that card does?
Off the top of my head, I think it's a 3 and a blue instant, like puts all attacking creatures on top of the library or back in the opponent's hand or something like that.
Yeah, back in your hand, exactly. So, when I played Justin in round 1, he basically bounced 3 creatures to my hands, which is just a gnarly tempo swing, right? So I was able to actually kind of play around it, make a relatively large Heartfire hero and attack in with trample and not expose myself to a bunch of that. I kind of got to the point where I could attack with like 2 creatures, not 3, and just keep like iteratively outgrowing his creatures and attacking. So I ended up winning that match 2-0, a really nice opponent. Then I was kind of watching off the side. Joe and Casey were playing, and I believe Joe scooped to Casey in the top 8 because Casey really wanted the invite, and Joe already had one. So fair enough. And then in the semifinals, I get paired against a guy named Ward, who I'd never met. Really nice guy. Kind of like me, has been playing forever. He and I were kind of talking. We both started playing in 94 when Revised came out. So that was cool. We got to talk about, playing as kids and stuff. And he was playing another variant of the Bant Collector Cage deck that I had played in round 3. So I kind of knew, I kind of like watched his match after round 5 when he won his winning in, and I kind of knew what I was expecting. Basically, I was able to interact with his Llanowar Elves early and slow him down enough to kind of just tempo him out of the game. That deck is good if you let it go wide and let him put a bunch of rectangles on the table that, can chump block and do stuff. The red deck, if you, interact with their mana dorks early, can kind of get under that deck, and that's kind of how it played out. Wasn't a particularly difficult match. I did have a really good kind of interesting line in game 3 where I had brought in Pyroclasm in that matchup, which is it's not particularly intuitive, but the deck does play elves and a bunch of 1/1 flyers and stuff that makes multiple bodies. So I could kind of set up this attack where I could attack with Hired Claw and Heartfire Hero that was growing every turn to Innkeeper's Talent, which was on the table, and he kind of blocked in a way where he got to get a clean block on my Hired Claw and kill it with his 3/3, and then I was able to Pyroclasm and take like 6 rectangles off the board on his side, and that was kind of the end of game 3. So that was kind of sweet. I will tell you, Pyroclasm as a card has overperformed in this deck for me, and I actually went up in my deck box that I sleeved after this. I went up from 1 copy to 2 because it's just been so good, and it's like the one way that this deck has on the draw of playing catch up, and kind of fighting back on the tempo angle. So that was cool. And then 8th and final round, I get paired against Casey, who I've played a bunch this year, right? You and I have played against him in all the team events that we've played. He's a regular as part of the Dungeons and Javas team that's based down there in Colorado Springs. And it's funny, he was playing early on the season. He had played that mono white Caretaker's Talent kind of mono white control deck, and then he's pivoted lately to a deck that I kind of call green white Enchanties, which every time he plays this card against me, I have to read it like twice. The card is Calyx, Guided by Fate. Have you looked at this card?
Dude, this card is so awesome. Yeah, it's like 1 white and a green for a legendary enchantment creature that makes copies of enchantments and puts counters on things. It does it all, definitely, in the enchantment wedge.
Yeah, no, it really does. And then he was also playing Bright Glass Gearhulk, which is the new green-white.
It's the captain of Eos, right? Like it goes and grabs 2 1/1 creatures.
It can be creatures, enchantments, or artifacts, actually. So it's pretty broad. You can go get he was getting Audacity for trample. He was getting Haywire Might to deal with my Innkeeper's Talent. He got Basilisk Collar to give his guys lifelink and death touch. It was a pretty nasty toolkit. And actually, I didn't mention this, but Ward, who I played in the semifinals, was also a 4X Bright Glass Gear Hulk deck. So they were kind of joking if he would have beat me in the semifinals, it would have had 8 Gear Hulks in the finals. But yeah, that card is quite good, actually. I was pretty impressed. Like the breadth of one mana stuff to go trigger and get is actually pretty wide for a standard format. And, to get 2 of them and stick them in your hand was pretty good. So anyway, so game 1, we go and we play. He plays turn 1 Llanowar Elf that I don't have a shock for. And then he plays turn 2 Calyx, Guided by Fate, and puts a counter on itself. So it becomes a 3/3. I play to the board. All I have is proactive stuff. I have mice, I have Innkeeper's Talent. So I play to the board. He untaps on turn 3, plays Sheltered by Ghosts, eating my threat on his Calyx, plays a second Sheltered by Ghosts, which, and then takes out my other threat, puts on his Llanowar Elf, then attacks me and plays a third Sheltered by Ghosts off the trigger of Calyx to eat my entire board.
Vomit.
So that was the end of my game 1 in the finals. And honestly, game 2 wasn't much better. His deck was just basically,
did he grab creature Innkeeper's Talent with a 3 Sheltered by Ghost?
He grabbed, yes, Heartfire, Hero, Manifold Mouse, Innkeeper's Talent were the 3 things that he killed with Sheltered by Ghost on turn 3.
Yeah, GG's.
Yeah, it was GG. It was hilarious, right? I was like, okay, this isn't even close. And honestly, the second game, I mulled to 6 and had a pretty interesting hand of like Verge Mountain, so a pretty decent mana base. Then I had 2 Paw Patch formations, 2 Hired Claw, and an Innkeeper's Talent. And I tanked for a while to try to figure out like what to put back because I didn't want to lose to a bunch of Shelter by Ghosts and Calyx. So I kind of wanted to keep the 2 Paw Patch formations. And then I was never going to, it was like I wasn't clear that I'd have a decent window to play the 2 Hired Claws. So I ended up putting 1 Hired Claw back. And it was kind of unfortunate because he really, the second game, just played a bunch of beaters. So he just started with Llanowar Elf and then cast turn 2 Sentinel the Nameless City and just beat me to death with giant 4/5 vigilance creatures. So I ended up having 2 Paw Patch formations stuck in my hand. I cycled 1 at end of turn and ate the food to draw a card, but yeah, he basically just ran me over and neither game was particularly close. So good games to Casey. He and I have played a bunch of great matches this year. This is the second time this season I've lost in the finals. I think the last one was at Mythic as well. So I feel like I'm about due, to take a W here somewhere.
I feel like conversely, like stores like Mythic, I wish that WotC would just give them their premium status. They could get 2 slots. I mean, that store is massive, supports 1 million games, follows all the guidelines, but I digress.
Yeah, the whole like WPN status 1 slot versus 2 slot things is like, I think overly political and really comes down to how often the store owners want to march to Wizards mandates and stuff. And I've heard from the GameFi that some of them are like kind of ridiculous, the stuff that they make them do for WPN status. So I can't really blame them because I don't understand the kind of what they're up against. But it is kind of frustrating that you go to stores like Mythic that have, typically a lot of turnout. Like I've seen, like this was one of the smaller RCQs I've seen there. I mean, I've seen 35, 40 people in there playing RCQs and they're, a super popular store in the area. They only get 1 invite. That you go to some smaller stores way outside of town, you maybe have like a 10-person or a 7-person RCQ and they get 2 invites, right? So it does seem kind of out of line to your point to like how much revenue they bring, how many cards they sell or how popular the stores are.
Awesome, Lee. Well, it sounds like you got a really good run there towards the end of standard season before we flip over to modern. I guess, are there any other big takeaways from the event and from standard as we now finish the Pro Tour and you finished your first RCQ after the Pro Tour?
I mean, if anybody else is playing the red decks, I just plead to you to like play enough mana. Like I played 23 lands in the last event and I'm closer to playing 24 than I am to 22, if that makes sense. I was talking to Paul Green, who played the Pro Tour, and he played 24 lands in his Gruul deck, ended up playing 2 Restless Ridge lines. Just his comment was like, when the deck makes land drops, it seems to win because it can spend its mana every turn. And I kind of agree with that. I guess on the PT topic, I did get to talk to Nick Diriu while I was at the tournament. He had just come back from Chicago. He had just finished playing his first ever Pro Tour. He played the Leyline Gruul deck, and I just want to say congrats to Nick. He made day 2 on his first Pro Tour. I think he ended up 8-8 as his final record, but he just had nothing but praise for the entire experience. I think he said he played players from 7 different countries while he was there, that his opponents were super respectful and awesome, and, like, he just has the fire to, like, get back and do it again, right? Like, he flew to Chicago, played in the Pro Tour, made day 2, and then here he was the next weekend grinding RCQs because, he wanted to go back again. So, it was just an awesome story, and I think it's one of the things that I would love to do at some point is just have the opportunity to play on the Pro Tour and experience that, and Nick was just, like, all fired up to go do it again.
Love that. Yeah, that's awesome. Hopefully that's something that we can all experience, but I know it's only for a select few. Any wrapping thoughts here about Standard?
I just wanted to mention they played the Standard Showcase Challenge over the weekend. It was won by Ray Zhang, a CFT sock, who I had the pleasure of playing at Spotlight Series Atlanta. Super nice person, very talented deck builder. He basically played Esper Pixie, but he cut all the bad cards, which I consider to be the Spiteful Hexmage and Optimistic Scavenger, and played Preacher of the Schism, Overlord of the Baelmerk, and Stock Up. So going like slightly bigger in the Pixie Mirror, and took down the entire event. There ended up being 3 total Pixie decks in the top 8, 2 mono red decks, very similar to the ones that we saw at the Pro Tour, although one of them was playing 4 of the Thornspire Verge and Questing Druids in the sideboard. So that was kind of a nice innovation there. And then Lucas Dukow, straight off of his Pro Tour top 8, was also playing Leyline Gruul. And I think that deck is just really really clean at this point, right? Like, he knows exactly what cards he wants to play. And I will tell you, of all the red variants, I think the Leyline is by far the most difficult to play. It often comes down to having to pick your spot in the game. And if you pick the wrong piece of interaction, or don't understand potentially what your opponent is representing, like, you simply lose the game on the spot. So I just think it's impressive he keeps putting up results with the Leyline deck, because I found it particularly difficult to play. So that was it, really. I just, Standard just seems great to me, right? There's just a huge variation of decks. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to mention is Carl Serap, who is, another great pro player, also top 8 of the Showcase Challenge with Convoke. And to me, the most interesting thing about these results is here we are 1 week after the Pro Tour, and the top 8 of the Showcase Challenge, which had, I think, north of 300 players all trying to qualify for the mocks, looked completely different than the top 8 for the Pro Tour. Domain was nowhere to be seen. I think the highest placing Domain deck was 21st. There were several high placing blue-white control variants, similar to what Ely Cassis played at the Pro Tour. But, like, I think that the meta is still super broad, and, I don't think that everyone's worried about Domain taking over the metagame. I still think there's plenty of viable strategies out there in Standard.
Yeah, maybe that's just confirmation of what we said last episode, where there probably doesn't need to be any bans in Standard or anything like that. I think they should just let it settle and start pumping in these new sets.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I am really excited for the next item on the agenda. And let me list out our agenda for today. I know we hop pretty quickly into Standard. So the rest of the agenda we have for the listener, we have Modern now. We spoke almost zero about Modern in the last episode, and that's been sort of my primary format as of the past few months. We'll walk through general thoughts, bans, unbans, tournaments. I also want to talk about each deck that's at the top of the meta pretty specifically. Then we also have some additional topics there. Touch on Legacy still. You're probably never going to have an episode where Lee and I don't talk about Legacy, so that's just something you're just going to have to sit there and deal with. If you don't like it, I apologize, but that is the best format of Magic. And then we're going to do some shout outs and a wrap up towards the end. So, Lee, are you ready to top into Modern?
Yeah, why don't you start us off, man? Because you've been crushing it lately with that busted Breach deck.
It is quite a deck. I guess we'll go down the line of the agenda before I sit here and ramble for 30 minutes about how insane the Grinding Breach deck is. But we'll start with the unbans. So about 2-3 months ago now, we're coming up on the next BNR, so I guess it'd be almost 3 months. We had 4 big unbans, and there was a few cards that I don't think I would have guessed that we'd have ever seen in Modern again. That being Mox Opal and Green Sun Zenith. We also additionally got the unban of Splinter Twin and Faithless Looting. So those 4 cards that have been unbanned, I think, in aggregate, have created a lot more excitement about Modern. A lot more folks have come in and played Modern. We've been firing our local Modern scene in the 20s, almost 30s at times. Overall, I think the excitement around it is high, but I think it is starting to taper off a little bit now that there's a lot of just really busted things going on in Modern. So my thoughts, I think, about the unbans are, I don't know if they were necessarily a mistake. I was stoked because I already had playsets of all 4 cards that got unbanned, so I didn't have to drop almost $800 on Mox Opals. So I got to basically just hop straight into it and play everything I wanted. What did you think so far, now that we have a few months under our belt with these busted Magic cards?
I just hope they keep doing it, you know? Like I said last time, I think it was the best BNR ever for Modern specifically, and there is no doubt that the attendance locally has easily doubled since this went on, and I think the online results show the same thing. So, I think it's a clear signal to Wizards that people want more cards unbanned, and we wanna see how they interact with all the new cards that have been printed, and, is the Breach deck too good? Yeah, probably is, but is everyone excited to play, and did everybody get to brew, and did we have 60 days of honeymoon period where everyone got to play their deck and do their thing? Yeah, and like that's great. I would prefer that they be on that side of the spectrum where they maybe unban things that are potentially dangerous, and then if they get too far out of line, we'll ban them again. Like that's fine. So I think it's a huge win.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the best examples that I can give about how wrong I was Green Sun Zenith. I thought that card could never get unbanned in Modern. And don't get me wrong, I love the fact that it's unbanned. I'm an Elves gamer at heart, but I thought that decks like Tron or Amulet Titan or just big green stompy decks and like Ponza and stuff were going to take an advantage of Green Sun Zenith. But that really doesn't seem to be the case. And I thought that Green Sun Zenith would be a direct replacement for Summoner's Pact in the Amulet deck, but they're just going to play both. Why not? Why not just play 10 to 12 copies of Primeval Titan? Like, I think that, we've seen a pretty insane amount of Amulet Titan decks kind of going against expectation, like Peter Husissian, who won RC
Portland.
Portland. Okay, so won RC Portland through a field of Grinding Breach, Boros Energy, Green Red Eldrazi, or Teamer Eldrazi. We didn't have Ketramos then. Yeah, I thought that card couldn't come off. It did. It's also like fine, which is crazy to think about in retrospect. So maybe there are other cards in Modern that could be fine. Maybe even like a Hogak or an Uro could come back or something like that.
I just would prefer that we get to bring back cards that don't have hyper repetitive play patterns. I mean, some of the Hogaks and Okos of the world are not the greatest gameplay experiences, but I prefer the unbans where you get to broaden what's strategically available to players. And if it ever comes back to doing the same thing over and over and over again every single turn, I think you can leave that on the ban list. Like, I played a lot of elk mirrors, and like, trust me, they're not that fun. So some of that stuff can stay there, but I'm with you, right? And honestly, I hope they apply this to more formats, not just Modern.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be great. As of right now, the only card I could possibly see being banned in Modern is Underworld Breach, and the only reason why I'm hesitant, if you asked me 3 weeks ago, I'd have snap told you that that card wasn't going to exist at the end of March. But now, with this new Ketramos deck sporting 4 Relic of Progenitus and some level of Nihil spell bombs, tampered a little bit of the Breach win rate. Obviously, the deck can still play through a lot of that, but overall, I think it at least gives it somewhat of a negative matchup. And, I guess as negative as 45-55 is going to get for Breach, I don't think the deck has that many bad matchups.
I don't think it actually has any bad matchups. I was looking at mtgdex.net, the win rate matrix for the last 60 days, and I believe the white black Ketramos deck was at 49%. It was the only poor matchup, and everything else across the board for Breach was positive with a 57% win rate overall. So I'm pretty sure it's clearly out of line, even if the Ketramos decks are approaching that on power level.
Sure, that makes sense. And my own personal win rate with the Breach deck is actually higher than it was when I was playing Nadu for the like month and a half I got to play with that card in Modern. My Breach win rate locally, again, keep in mind locally, this isn't like online trophies or PTQs or RCQs, is like over 90%. It's pushing like 95%. I think I've had one, maybe 2 match losses in the better part of 2 months, and you've seen it. I was your Modern seat for 2 events, so it's like you've gotten to see firsthand how dumb that deck can be, where it's like I could misplay for 10 turns in a row and then just draw an Underworld Breach, and it's like, I win. It's pretty wild. And I think that goes along with what we have on the agenda here too, personal RCQ planning. I'm gonna play Breach. If they're not gonna ban this card, I'm gonna play the Breach deck, and I'm gonna put a Pithing Needle in my main board for the relics and the Nihil Spellbombs of the world, and I'm just gonna keep carrying on.
What's interesting is I don't think that Relic of Progenitus actually does anything. You can still cycle through your entire deck and cast the Oracle without giving priority. So I don't even think that the Relic is that good. Like, I think it's a fine deck, but I don't think Relic is actually stopping you from going off. I don't even think that's relevant.
Well, you do have to have the one of copy of Thoracle in your hand before you try and do that.
Is
Because
that true?
if you mill over it with a Breach or a Grinding Station, and you can't play it yet because your library is not empty, they pop Relic and exile it with the 20 cards that they're taking with it too. So the only way that it works where you can deck yourself and play around Relic is by already having Thassa's Oracle in hand, which is only a one of. Or Grape Shot and or Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, or whatever the 4-mana Jace is called.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So it has a lot of impact, frankly. It's enough of an impact where like myself and Nathan Goldberg, who will talk about his list later, we're gonna be putting Pithing Needle in the main board, and that being for again Relic or Nihil Spellbomb. I mean, Ghost Vacuum I really don't care about, but really the two full graveyard bomb effects are the ones that matter most.
Yeah. Well, I saw Nathan won the challenge yesterday. What does it look like?
His list looks really, really good. Let me pull this up here. I actually sleeved this up today because my cards were all pieced out from playing Legacy, and I had to update my Breach list from after Chicago. But so Nathan is playing, and I'm going to highlight the things that aren't standard in the deck. So 1 Pithing Needle in the main, went down to 3 Emery, which is something that at the RC level, Alan Wu and Paul Green and a few other folks determined that 3 Emery was enough. Then Nathan also played 2 Into the Floodmaw, 2 Sink into Stupor rather than 1. Only 17 lands, including 3 Urza's Saga, which I actually also had a conversation with Paul Green. Paul comes up a lot at this point. Had a conversation with Paul about the data behind it. And basically the conversation we had was Paul's testing team for RC Portland came to the conclusion that we need to just be a Breach deck first and take away from sort of the sub plans and be the best Breach deck we can be, rather than trying to be the most well-balanced deck that we can be. And Paul was 100% right. He finished, I think, 12-3 or something like that, along with a lot of that testing team too. I think Paul just fell short of top 8. I know he was definitely in top 32. And then Nathan's also playing 1 copy of Stock Up, which this card has been impacting quite a few formats. So of the main board, that's a lot of the key differences from what I was doing. Into the Floodmaw is really interesting. I think that that's a jerk reaction to a lot of what the Ketchermos deck is doing with some of these graveyard bombing permanents. Stock Up, I feel like, is just kind of funny in a weird way. I think it's there to maybe just try it. Obviously, Nathan won the whole challenge, so it was successful, but I don't know. Having just 1 copy is a little interesting to me. And Nathan also played 4 Preordain, which I've played 4, I've played 2, I've played 1, and I've played 0. So 4 Preordain is a little interesting to me too, and I'm kind of excited to go back to 4 because I do love cantripping.
Yeah, I think everyone's trying to figure out how much Stock Up they're allowed to play. Like, everybody wants to play a bunch, but how often can you tap out on turn 3 and not interact with the board in any capacity? But it's a really strong effect. So I would not be surprised to see those numbers keep creeping up. Even in the standard challenge, right? CFT Sock played 2 in his Pixie deck. There's people playing them in Legacy. I see it a lot in the blue-black tempo decks popping up. It's in the Sneak and Show decks. It's just probably the best 3-mana card advantage spell that exists, right? So I think people are just going to continue to play it.
Yeah, I don't know. I personally, I don't own any copies, so I put a Flame of Anor in that spot for now. I'm kind of a sucker for Flame of Anor because killing your creature, draw 2 cards, I mean, that's more advantage than Stock Up for 3 mana. It just has more of a requirement of having a wizard in play, and it's 2 different colors of mana, so...
Yeah, they're just very different, right? It's the thing. We were also talking about comparing it to Brain Surge before, and I think that's an interesting comparison in Modern and Legacy. But digging 5 cards as opposed to 4 or 3 or 2, whatever. Like 5 cards is a lot, you know? It's kind of like we talk about the difference between 2 and 3 cards when you talk about the difference between Ponder and Preordain, right? Preordain can technically look at 3, Ponder can look at 4, and it makes all the difference, right? So even compared to Brain Surge, where you can put stuff back in your library, getting to look at that 5th card, you know, could be the difference, right? So I think it's unclear where it fits, and everybody's still kind of playing around with how many they can get away with.
Sure, I can get behind that, and I'm gonna try and pick up a playset if I can afford it at this point. I think it's like a $6 or $7 uncommon now. I'm not sure if you were able to pick yours up, but
You know, I did.
oh, you did. Nice. I might have to borrow one from you so I can play the fun of one of. But we also have 3 modern events that we wanted to highlight here. So that being Axion Now has 187 players. The Chinese Regional Championships, that's 302 players. And then the Modern Showcase, which I'm particularly excited to talk about, 342 players. Where do you want to start with this, Lee?
I mean, what has you so excited about the Modern Showcase? I can't even imagine.
So the Modern Showcase was won by Storm. And for those that may know, may not know, I spent probably 2.5 years solely dedicating myself to Storm in all formats. Not quite a CFT sock combo for the sake of combo style, but raw Storm cards. I mean, Grape Shot, Tendrils of Agony, Brain Freeze, actual Storm effects. So I used to be a site writer for the Epic Storm. I worked closely with Alex McKinley, Bryant Cook, Jordan Kareem. It was a really good experience and it leveled me up a lot as a player. I've since stepped away from it. If Storm's great, don't get me wrong, I'm going to play Storm. But I'm sort of becoming this best deck gamer now and I need to stick to my guns there, which honestly makes me excited to see that Storm was victorious out of 342 players. And the biggest highlight here, because this Storm list, I don't say this to be pedantic, but it is very stock, except for 2 things that I wanted to highlight. One is 2 artist talent in the main. This is a card that I played a lot in quote-unquote Explorer, which is just Pioneer for Magic. Artist talent was awesome in Lotus Field. It's really good at basically brick-proofing your combo, because once you get going, all the lands that you draw through cards like Manamorphose or Past in Flames lines, different impulse effects. You know, just when you accumulate cards like lands in your hand, Artist Talent allows you to dump them off, or additional ruby medallions that you don't need, or maybe you want to discard a Past in Flames just because you're going to flash it back and you're not going to cast it in your hand, and you want to convert it into a card. Artist Talent is really, really, really good for that. And it's only 1 mana with Ruby Medallion, which I think is super cool. So that's a main board thing that I like to highlight. In the sideboard, here is what I think led to this deck doing as well as it did. 4 Orange Chant in the sideboard. Before I give you the spark notes, Lee, why do you think that matters?
I mean, for playing against an entire top 8 full of people that are trying to cast Mox Opal 27 times on the same turn, that seems pretty solid.
Sure is. Yeah, definitely. So that basically is, it's effectively a 1 white Time Walk. When you're talking about the Storm versus Breach matchup, which I think is super cool. I think it's great tech. I'm a Silence believer. Not that it matters in this matchup, but Silence doesn't target. Orange Chant does. Small thing. Orange Chant also, you can kick it to stop combat. Silence can't. Small thing. I usually like a split. That's just me being neurotic about Storm decks and how they're constructed. However, congratulations to this player for kicking ass with, I think, one of my favorite cards in Legacy that I'm happy to see printed in Modern.
Is there do all the Storm decks play Underworld Breach in the sideboard like this one?
They can. And the reason why it matters is because you can still go off even if your graveyard gets picked apart or bombed altogether. Because Breach, you know, it's just the dumbest Magic card ever, where you can play it and you can just sit there and play more cards out of your hand or whatever. So if it goes on the stack and you have 5 or 6 cards in hand and they bomb your graveyard, it's a whole lot different because it still resolves. Whereas Past in Flames, if it sees nothing in the graveyard, you do nothing. So look at it as kind of the 5th Past in Flames, but it also does have some different like play particularity, if that's what you want to call it. You're still playing the 4th Past in Flames in the sideboard for Wish, but Breach, I've seen it, I've played it, I've cut it, I've hated it, I've liked it. It's kind of just there in this deck. It's not nearly the card that it is in the Grinding Station deck.
Yeah, fair enough.
So this deck's super cool. Also, another highlight, 3 of the top 8 of this event were Breach decks. I imagine this Ruby Storm player either smoked people in game 1 and then probably didn't lose to Breach very often in games 2 or 3, just having the orange chant, and then also being a glass cannon deck that said, well, you can't kill me, so now I'm going to kill you and you can't stop it. Because Breach doesn't really have that much for Storm outside of like Soul Guide Lantern and Haywire Might, which are just saga targets and they're one ofs. So I totally understand why Hugo Freitas won, just tore through this bracket.
Yeah, I was looking. He beat Breach in the quarterfinals, and he beat the white black Ketramos deck in the semifinals, and he beat Breach again in the finals.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me at all. And outside of the top 8, 10th and 11th were also Breach players, so I imagine that those two players were very close to, they're probably a game away from making top 8 themselves. So this bracket could have easily looked like 5 Breach decks for this player. So I love to see that. It makes me super happy that Storm is in a good position. And if you look at the rest of the data, you don't really see a Storm deck for quite a while. And then another highlight that I didn't really expect was the best placing Boros Energy deck being 14th. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be on a little bit of a downswing, but I think that deck is still solid. It's proactive, it's aggressive. If you play it well, it's hard to beat. Like I think it's a step below where Breach is. I think everything is a step below Breach at this point, but I don't know. I still think Energy is going to be a fine deck and around if it doesn't get any cards banned here in the future. I just, you can't be in too bad of a position if you're being proactive and spending all your mana every turn and you're playing the most efficient threats in the format. But I think it is definitely behind the Breach deck, and then I think the white black Ketramos decks are now have turned from like okay matchups to bad matchups, so it's just not in a great spot at this very moment.
Sure. Yeah. I can get behind that. You don't have to convince me one way or another, that Breach is by far and large the best deck in Modern. We did see an face. Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on a second. The last comment I wanted to make on the tournament results is the Chinese regional championship, where 300 people, played in the RC, and there was 10 players with 7-1-1 or better records, and 6 of them were on Breach. And to me, that's just like the picture of the format. It feels almost as much as it did with almost like when Nadu was there. We're almost back to a one deck format.
Yeah, I agree. And looking through this, it's pretty universal. There also is, I'm looking at Wang Kunrui. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize, but I'm looking at their list that they won the whole event with. And a lot of the things that Nathan is doing in his list are also being reflected here. So we're seeing like the 1 Pithing Needle in the main over like the Aether Spellbomb. We're seeing 3 Urza Sagas. This player is playing 2 Preordain, 1 Swan Song, 1 Unholy Heat. That easily could be 4 Preordain, and those are all cards that I've been playing in the past too. We also do see a Vampire's Vengeance. This card is interesting to me. So it looks like it's a fire spout that creates blood tokens. So that's filling that void. But
no, it's not a fire spout. It's a Kozilek's Return. It's an instant speed 3 mana Pyroclasm, but makes a blood token.
Got it. And the image I'm looking at, it's called Mysterious Blood Illness, and then below it says Vampire's Vengeance. Cards within the cards, man. Cool. We don't have to touch too much more on the actual events themselves. Do you want to talk about the decks of Modern that are really formulating the image of it today?
I mean, we've talked about Breach quite a bit, but what else do you have on your list?
Well, I'm looking at Energy, Eldrazi, Ketramos, Domain, and then Ketro Dominance, which is Dave Shields' baby, right? Is he the original creator of that?
Well, I don't know if he's the original creator. I think he neck decked it as well, but he did, basically fire up the deck and win a challenge with it last week. And if you're interested in any of that, you can listen to it on the Jerry T podcast, which I always recommend. Yeah, I mean, we can go down the list. I'll give a couple thoughts here on Energy. Again, I think it's always going to be a good deck. I think it's proactive. I think that it puts your opponent in a tough position if they're not prepared. And ultimately, like, Flage is a just ridiculous end game for an aggro deck. Even though I think it's right now in a tough spot, I don't really expect it to go anywhere. And you probably can't be too wrong to register it if you're not going to actually register the best deck in Breach at the moment.
No notes there for me. Honestly, I think the Energy deck didn't really lose that much of a step. I think banning Amped Raptor and Gigantha was just a haircut on this deck, and it's still very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely and the card that always overperforms to me is Goblin Bombardment. Like it just because again, I'm probably making an error in modern in trying to play interactive decks for the most part, and you just simply can't interact with the board when they have bombardment in play. So that's the card that ends up beating me a bunch.
No, it's sort of like their storm card, their combo piece, if you will. Make a bunch of dudes, turn them sideways, play bombardment, and fling everything to kill you.
It just gives them inevitability, right? Because like every single thing that they spend mana on then converts to damage. So then you're at the point where you're on a clock. It's like 2 turns, 3 turns from now. Like every single creature they play is going to do at least one. And then it's going to smash you for 4 if it's a Flage. And if they ever get to buy it back, you're probably dead. So, I mean, to me, it's just the thing that gives the deck reach because it's not a Lightning Bolt deck. But honestly, Bombardment's even better.
The next one we got is Eldrazi. Eldrazi, I'm looking through these events that we pointed out, and there's not a whole lot of it really kicking ass anymore. It was quite a good deck, basically through the end of 2024, and it seems like it's taken a bit of a slide. Portland, yeah, I mean Portland it did relatively well, but not nearly as well as what I would consider to be like the third best deck in Modern.
Yeah, my assumption is that the white black Ketramos deck has eaten into this some. They just have like so many more ways to draw cards, which gives them so many more opportunities to look at Solitude, which is a pretty good card. Plus, the other thing that I think is kind of you wouldn't expect, but like a card like Relic of Progenitus is extremely good against Eldrazi if their primary go over the top plan is to Emrakul you, and all of a sudden Emrakul costs 12 or 13 as opposed to 6 or 7. It makes a huge difference, right? So I think Eldrazi is on the slide. And I mean, it never had a particularly good breach matchup. Basically, people had to shove 4 Karn in the deck to have it even be competitive with breach, which kind of opens you up, to other decks where Karn is not super effective. So I think that it's definitely taking a backseat to breach in the white black deck right now. And I personally wouldn't be looking to sleeve up Eldrazi Temple right now if I was trying to win a tournament.
The interaction that's particularly interesting to me, I guess, in the matchup between Eldrazi and Ketramos is me going turn 1 Ugin's Labyrinth, put Devourer of Destiny or whatever under it, and then my opponent plays White Orchid Phantom. And then I lose my land, I lose my fatty, and I'm going to get a basic. It's not good. It's not good for the Eldrazi deck, unfortunately. I do think the deck's very cool, but it seems like it's just, unless something dramatic changes, it's always going to sort of play second fiddle to Breach and Energy right now.
Yeah, I played a league with the Necrodominance Ketramos deck this last week, and in my one match versus Eldrazi game 2, I blew up his Eldrazi Temple with God, what's the sinkhole? Break the Ice, and then on turn 3 vindicated his basic forest with Utopia Sprawl on it, and he rage quit. So that's how that went.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I guess we won't talk about the things that seem obvious to everyone else as far as like how Modern looks right now. Let's talk about the fact that Quintanoli doesn't know any other color besides red.
I almost didn't put this on the notes, but every time Quinn posts a thing, I always take a look at it. Actually, he played a pretty interesting Goblins deck in the Showcase Challenge. If you go back and look at those in Standard. So Quinn's just a pretty innovative deck builder, but he really knows how to get his opponents dead. And I saw that he played Burn in a challenge, and I was like, what is going on here? And then I looked at the second time, and this is actually mono red Burn. So as long as I've been playing Modern, which is, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years now probably, everyone's played Boros Charm and splashed white for whatever cards. Quinn just said, no, I don't need Boros Charm anymore. I'm just going to play every single 1 mana deal 3 that I can. So he has the new Bolt Wave card from Foundations. He's playing 4 Skewer the Critics. His only 2 mana spells in the deck are Searing Blaze, and he's playing 4 main deck Skull Crack, which I assume is to try to beat the energy matchup because Flage or Guide of Souls is basically impossible to beat. So I mean, I'm not going to go run out and play Burn next week in Modern, but I do find it interesting that he continues to iterate on decks, and he often makes them leaner and more simple than the versions that came before, and like always continues to have success. So, just cheers to Quintanoli. Like, he's kind of my hero.
It's also funny to look at this because you know how much I love a quad laser deck. And this is the most quad laser that it gets in Modern. It's 20 lands, 40 spells, and it is 12 creatures, 4 Eidolon, 4 Guide, or 4 Goblin Guide, 4 Swift Spear, and then it's 28 instants and sorceries. All 4 ofs: Bolt Wave, Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt, Rift Bolt, Searing Blaze, Skewer the Critics, and Skullcrack. Like, talk about just knowing exactly what you want to do at all times.
Yep. And 4 Magebane Lizard in the sideboard, which again I assume is pretty good against, the breach decks and everything else. So, I don't think this is ever going to be a tier 1 deck in 2025 Modern, but it warms my heart to see him like put a top 8 up with 90 players on Moto.
Love that. Cool. Okay. Well, so what are your thoughts going into this upcoming Modern RCQ season? There's obviously there's change on the horizon here in about 28 days, but I don't think it's going to be so dramatic that we can't start at least personally planning out our RCQ season.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do, to be honest with you, because I think it's clear that if the breach deck is still legal, then we're going to play that. I just can't imagine that it will be. I've never seen a deck with this kind of win rate make it through a BNR. So I have to make an assumption that breach is going to be gone. My goal for the next season is to play something as proactive as possible. Like, I am not a gamer who's ever very good at playing like the interactive ramp decks, which have historically been very good in Modern. The Trons of the last decade, the amulets, all the busted artifact mana decks. Like, these are never decks that I gravitate towards, but they often end up being the best decks in the format because outside of Blood Moon specifically, there is and I guess Harbinger now out of the blue decks, but like historically that's been the only way to interact with the mana engines that exist in Modern. Fundamentally different than Legacy, where everyone, 50% of the decks play 4 Wastelands or whatever, right? So I think you're better off in Modern just being as proactive as possible and breaking whatever mana engine exists in the deck. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I don't know what that looks like yet. I always my heart says to go play like some sort of interactive deck in Modern, and it's never been particularly good for me. So I don't know. This coming year, I'm going to be trying to murder my opponent as quickly as possible.
Maybe we can convert you to a combo gamer and teach you some Storm, or I don't know. Red just seems so dominant in Modern right now. So Storm, I'm going to exclude Breach because I'm not sure that deck exists. But even this Burn deck, I think, is super good. And it's also like relatively cheap if a newer player wanted to get into Modern and at least make a run at the RCQ. I know your thoughts on that are a little bit different than mine, but I think that the Quinn deck is interesting because I think that that's a really good first step, and you'll probably end up getting a lot of wins off the back of the deck being so clean, even if you might not be the best player sitting at the table.
Yeah. So again, a lot of people start with Burn when they go into Modern, and I think it's actually kind of a tough place to start because you don't learn where interaction is possible. And I think new players to Modern, especially to Modern Burn, think that they are always the beatdown in the games, and that is really not the case. I think the secret to winning with Burn and Modern, which is something my buddy Nick really taught me as we grew up playing Modern together, is like on the draw in a lot of matchups, you're the control. You have inevitability in that the game will end at some point, but you shouldn't be just, flinging your goblin guides into their blockers or, lava spiking their face or bolting their face on end step and stuff. Like, the Burn deck actually has a ton of removal and can play the control role in particular game states. And I think you got to figure that out. And, again, everyone quotes the Mike Flores, like, who's the beatdown article. But again, like, every time you go back and read it and pay attention and apply it to 2025, like, all those concepts like are still real. And there's a lot of these decks, even the red deck that I play in Standard, I am a lot of times on the draw. If I won the first game in game 2, boarding into all my removal spells and pyroclasms, and the first 3 or 4 turns in the game, I'm just trying to disrupt my opponent and then turn the corner, and that's a thing that even in a quad laser lava spike deck, I think is something you still got to keep in mind.
Well, so if the Burn deck's not a good intro into Modern, I wanted to use an example of like, how would you help your buddy Farhad in this Modern RCQ season? Because Farhad is a great example of someone who prioritizes collecting, drafting, sealed, vintage, old school, and really doesn't do a whole ton of Modern. But how would you get a player like that has a background in Magic, but maybe doesn't quite have all of the familiarity with Modern right now?
Well, I think it's honestly too economically prohibitive to buy all the decks. So, what I'd recommend to any player is just to like sign up for a Mana Traders or a Card Hoarder account on Magic Online and devote like 2 weeks to simply playing two leagues with all the best decks. Right? Play a couple leagues with Breach, play a couple with Ketramos, play a couple with Energy. Like just make the rounds and see kind of what sticks because too many people, I think, make the kind of ill-informed choice of like looking at a modern metagame, picking a deck that they think like looks cool, and then having to spend like what call it $1,000 or $1,200 on a modern deck to where it's really gonna, maybe or maybe not gonna play out as you would expect. Anytime anybody wants to get into modern, I think you need to like try all the flavors because it's a pretty aggressive space to try to break your way into. If you've never played a lot of modern, there's a lot of interactions that you need to learn. There's a lot of information that you simply can't learn any other way than to like play the decks yourself. So I know a lot of people don't love playing on Magic Online, but like that's really the only place to truly play modern in a digital way. So I would advise not picking a pet deck and playing the top of the format and then figuring out where upon, where in that group you think you could have success.
Yeah, and to go along with that, I would say make friends. Like we often overlook the gathering piece, and there's a lot of folks out there that if you make enough friends after a few weeks in your local scene, and eventually you're like, man, I really want to try this whole breach deck. Let me ask Grant if I can borrow his breach deck, and he can go back to playing elves for a week. Like I'd be happy to do that, even for a newer player, where I can lend the deck, and neither of us are leaving the room until they're done using it, right? Make friends. If you don't want to make a Magic Online account, try and lend the best of your ability. If not, you might just have to spend the $9 or $10 a week and build up that account. I guess we already touched on this a little bit, but it's a good segue into deck specialization. We know a lot of deck specialists around the area. Amulet Titan always being the one where whenever I think of a deck specialist, and even in like any format, just across Magic, my brain always goes to Primeval Titan because the folks that play that deck have only played that deck for 6, 7, 8 years, basically since Summer Bloom was still legal. And they're really good examples of how deck specialization can go really well. I think that there's also some pretty rough examples of how deck specialization can really limit you as a player. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm never thrilled to get paired into Korra or some Kim playing Amulet. I'll tell you that. Like, I don't care what format it is or what era of modern is. Like, I'm never thrilled, right? Because those guys who have Amulet brain, like to watch Dom Harvey play Amulet is just really a treat, Like, and my brain just doesn't work that way, right? I'm never gonna be a perfect Amulet gamer, and I know that, but I agree with you. It can kind of swing two ways, right? Like, you can either be somebody who's latched on to a powerful proactive strategy, whether it's Tron lands or Amulet or whatever, and if you stick with it, you can have a lot of success. I think there is a lot of edge to be gained by understanding literally every matchup you could face, knowing all your sideboard plans for every matchup, understanding what all the corner cases are. Like there's a lot to be gained in modern. Like you're talking about a card pool that's what 22 years of cards or something at this point, right? So it's a huge card pool, and I think that's really great. The other side of that coin is like I would never recommend to somebody to become a Nikachu, right? Like Nikachu is a guy that I've known for a long time. I've played against him in both modern and legacy in-person events, but like he's just like planted his flag as like the Merfolk guy, right? And like unfortunately, Merfolk has not really been a competitive deck in any format for 12 years, right? So like I think that if you want to commit to a deck and you're winning with it and you're having success and great. But I think if you get to the point where like you've stuck your flag in the ground and you're like the diehard Maverick guy or the diehard Merfolk guy or the diehard Nick Fit guy or whatever, and like you're not having any success, I think you kind of need to revisit like what you're trying to do if your goal is to try to win the tournament, right? So, there's two sides of the coin, I think, here.
Yeah, there always is. And sometimes it does pay off when randomly Merfolk is just like could just be the scariest deck at any event that's full of Tron and Amulet decks. Because I think Merfolk preys on both of those decks pretty cleanly with all the land destruction and converting everything to islands. But it is a really great example of like if you're going to die on a hill, make sure the hill's really, really high.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing is you can be a deck specialist and you can focus on a deck and you can play it most of the time. But even the players who are in that mode, when their deck isn't good, the good ones are out there trying to figure out what else to play, and then Amulet or for whatever reason becomes their backup plan or whatever, and then you know what I mean. But like you have to be able to stray from that, even if you have a thing that you really like. If you know you're trying to go to an RCQ and win that particular weekend.
Agreed. Agreed. And there's only but so many times where I can show up with elves in a Wrath of the Skies meta and get promptly humbled. But that's my baby. But I've sort of fallen off the hill, and I prefer winning over just going 2-2 every week.
You love Basic Forest and Gaia's Cradle, and like fair enough, man. But I am much more of a Patrick Sullivan, no forest, no plains guy myself.
Yeah, yeah. His RC deck was hilarious. It was terrible, but it was that basically an Is It Murktide deck from 2022. That's what it looked like to me, featuring Snapcaster Mage. But I digress. I digress. So let's talk about we talked about the RCQs. We talked about the Pro Tour. We talked about the local scene. Let's talk about sort of the in between of all of that. We're pretty fortunate and blessed to have a tournament series specific to the Front Range. So think Colorado, Wyoming. I think those are really the only two states that we've had attend these events, but we have a series called the Mountain Magic Series. And I want to give a big shout out to Ian Hennig, who is the tournament organizer for this entire series. He built it from the ground up with help from friends and here and there. But for the most part, this is his baby of sorts, where it is a full year tournament series with one event per month. And this event isn't the same month over month. We've seen things such as from your standard event all the way up to eternal team trios being Pauper, Legacy, and Vintage. So it's all over the place. We even had Dual Commander, we had CEDH, Modern, Pioneer. We had all sorts of different formats that we get to play month over month, all fighting towards the same goal. So I guess before I hop into the state of this year's Mountain Magic series, what do you think of the MMS?
I mean, props to Ian again. It's to me the best thing about it is we get to play team trios, and I just love playing team events. I think that there is a lot of respect to people that show up and battle in the MMS. I think there's always great camaraderie among the people that participate, and it's like something to play for all year, right? It's not just a one and done thing like an RCQ and you kind of forget about it, and they keep a leaderboard and everybody kind of watches what goes on. I mean, one of the coolest things last year, I wasn't here the year I didn't qualify, but the fact that they played, I think it was Modern as the Swiss rounds for the Invitational, and then the top 8 was they drafted Vintage Cube, which is it's just an awesome way to like end a year long tournament. So I mean, I've played a bunch this year, and I'm pretty stoked on trying to make the Invitational and compete this year.
Agreed. The way that these events structure out is whoever places first, even the whole team itself, whoever is the first place finisher will automatically gets a bid into the championship series. And this is at the end of the season. So ours will be in June of this year for the 2024-2025 season. So any winner, automatic bid, you're locked in. And that creates 20 winners a year. So there's, I think, 3 team events. So that's 9 invites, or maybe it's 4 team events. 12, and then another 8 individual events. So that would equal out to 20. And then there's also a leaderboard. So if you make top 16, first off, you get 1 point for attending in general. Anyone attending gets a point. If you make top 16, you get 3 points. And then if you make top 8, you get between 6 to 10 points depending on your finish. And then first place gets an auto qualifier. And then also if you do win MMS, you're qualified for the next year. So we'll be playing against Sung Kim and his Amulet Titan deck this year.
Well, goody.
So there's a leaderboard right now. Lee and I are actually, fortunately, at the top of it. I had a really good MMS series this year, and a lot of that also has to do with Lee and our third, what do you call it, compadre, Daniel Cooperman. We crushed, I think, every team event that we sat down and played. I think we made top 4 of all of them, pending the team sealed event. But that gave us a ton of points. I also had success. I top 8'd the first Modern one with Nadu. I top 8'd the Legacy one with Grixis Delver when it like kind of was bad. It was like in the Psychic Frog meta. That one
can't be that bad.
That felt like I was working hard that day. So.
Yeah, sure.
And I think so. Those 5 tops in of itself put me at first or second on the leaderboard up until this past Sunday, where there was an MMS that neither of us attended.
And they also get, it's another way to play legacy for something real, right? It's not just like, oh, it's a weekly F&M or we got to wait a whole year to go to Eternal Weekend, right? It's like something for stakes that's real, and you get to sleeve up Delver or Reanimator or whatever you feel. I was kind of sad I didn't get to play this year, but anything that has a real reason to play legacy for stakes, like I'm always in for that.
No doubt, no doubt. We do kind of have an agenda item that I'm also kind of excited about because it has nothing to do with Magic the Gathering cards at all. Let's talk about event preparation. We're talking about the MMS, we're talking about RCQs. We've done Eternal Weekend, I've flown to Chicago, you've flown to Atlanta. How do you prepare not only your body, but your mind for events at different levels? Do you also treat it individually for the event?
So for the big events, I actually start my preparation a couple days ahead of time, like being sober, eating well, sleeping well. I mean, you really have to start to doing that a couple days in advance if you're going to play back to back like 9 rounds like you would in a spotlight series or the pro tour or whatever. But I'll give you an example of like what I worked on specifically on Saturday before the RCQ. So the first thing that I did starting in 2024 that I think is the number one thing is that my deck is sorted, ready, and my deck list is written and in my bag by 8 o'clock the night before. So I'm totally done. I've decided exactly what sideboard I'm playing. I know exactly what deck I'm going to play. I've already sorted it. I already wrote down my deck list. I filled my magic bag with my water bottle and my snacks and everything that I needed. And I literally zip it up and close it and set it by the front door before I go to bed. So that's the first thing, because if you're trying to run around and do all that in the morning, I see so many people that look like they rolled out of bed, grab their magic cards, half-ass, race to the store, and then like 4 minutes before the event starts, they're like trying to write down their deck list, right? And like you're just putting yourself, I think, at a huge disadvantage if that's what's going on. So, and I said the same thing to you and to Daniel and stuff when we played team events. Like you guys need to be totally prepared before you go to bed, for the next day. I don't know. I don't know if you've done that this year
Thanks,
or not.
Dad.
I'm telling you, it's a big deal.
No, I echo a lot of the same things too, and I've gotten a lot better about this. Early 2022, when I was living in DC, I used to go out and get all smashed up with my friends at bars and whatever, and I'd go to sleep at 5, wake up at 9 for legacy 1Ks and 2Ks. I'd still do pretty well, but I'd be feeling pretty miserable for the majority of the day. The past like year and a half or so, though, I've made it a really prioritized point to do very similar to what you're talking about in creating the least amount of friction I possibly can the morning of events. So like basically all I got to do is wake up, shower, hydrate, eat, have a cup of coffee, and then hop in the car and go. It's important for me, and like, you don't like those people that you're talking about that do everything last second and show up and are scrambling to get their list down. You're starting an event with a high heart rate, high blood pressure, stress, all of these things that can be completely avoided by just doing things the night before. And I implore people to, if you got to sleeve your deck, do it the night before. If you got to write down a deck list, do as best you can. If you don't have a sheet, I'm guilty of this where I'll just take a blank sheet of printer paper, just write it out anyway, ask for permission in the morning, and if I got to rewrite it, I'm happy to do that because I got nothing else to do that morning. So creating about an hour or two of a buffer where if something does go wrong, you can solve it before your event, and you also don't have to stress is what I've been focusing on too. And then also eating right and getting good sleep. Like have a nice meal. I can't tell you how many times where it's like I'm excited to sit there and cook a nice meal for an hour, get into bed at 9, crash at 10, wake up at 7 or 8, go get a workout in, come back, get all my shit together, and then get over to the event. Workouts before events, by the way, there hasn't been an event that I've missed a cut on that I've worked out before the event.
I mean, that's awesome, dude. I am typically up. I mean, the older I get, the earlier I get up or whatever, but I'm definitely up at least 3 hours before the event begins, just because like I want to be awake. I want to have food. I want to do stuff. When I left the house on Saturday morning, I had an entire like 24-ounce Yeti cup full of water. I had an entire 24-ounce like water bottle full of water in my bag and a cup of coffee and a kombucha. And I drank all 4 of those things by the time I got to the end of the tournament. And I played 8 rounds on Saturday. I played all 8 rounds, and I honestly felt as good when I finished as when I started. And I will tell you, when I first was playing Grand Prix a long time ago, and I was doing the same thing as you, going out drinking the night before, doing stuff, I would be literally dead. after 8 rounds. Or like when I went to my first Eternal weekends after COVID and stuff, and like it was a real struggle to get through 9 rounds. And now I feel like I can sit down and play 8 rounds of Magic and like I'm totally fine, and that is literally 100% just about preparing yourself and getting you in a right spot. It has really literally nothing to do with anything that goes on during the entire tournament. All that happened before the tournament even started.
Agreed, agreed. And this one thing I'm going to talk about here too, it might be a sensitive subject for some folks. It might not be. I don't know, but this is something that I really prioritize and I think really helps me is trying to stay in decent shape. Trading card games in general just have a really bad like stereotype of folks that don't really take care of themselves. And if you look at the Pro Tour, a lot of folks at the Pro Tour level, they're all in great shape, they're all healthy, they're all high, like their hygiene is very good. And I think that a lot of that does translate to your game ultimately. So, planning well in advance, weeks, months, years, and just staying in shape, keeping everything where it's supposed to be, and making sure that you're as healthy as you possibly can be ultimately is a big benefit to you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you burn a ton of calories using your brain for 9 hours in a row. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just about physical exertion, it's just about having enough energy capacity in reserve to do it hour after hour after hour after hour and like be fine. And it's like, by the time you get to the finals of your RCQ, it's 8 hours later, you're in round eight. Basically, like you want to be playing your best Magic of the day, right? Not your worst Magic. And like to get to that point where you can finish an 8 hour stint and literally be playing your best Magic at the end of it. I mean, that's a thing you have to work up to, and it's taken me a long time.
Yeah, even at the PT level too. I mean, I use the word freaks. Like, I don't think I could play 16 rounds of Magic and, finish how I started. And a lot of these folks can. Like, they just kick ass round over round over round. And it's clear that they're very prepared in both mind and body and in their game plan. I mean, game plan obviously matters, but there seems to be this, a lot of folks put more stress on the game plan and their 15th sideboard card than they do about like eating a salad and drinking a gallon of water the day before a big event.
Yep. Yep. 100%. And honestly, it's probably helped me as much as anything I've done and all. I've studied the game. I've worked on my stuff. I've tried to play better decks. I've worked on my sideboard plans. Like I've done all that stuff, but like, nothing compares to being physically and mentally prepared.
Agreed. And I won't sit here and quote unquote wag my finger at anyone that's not doing the things that we're saying. This is just what works for us. And this is the stuff that, we have tested in the lab and have litmus tested against our own physiology. And it's our advice to you. It might not work for you. It might work for you. Everyone's different, but we can carry on to the next thing, which is legacy. We're back to legacy. Who thought
I mean, there's always got to
revisit
be,
this?
it's got to be like a little bit right at the end. Like, even if we don't talk about Legacy as the primary format, like, there's always something going on.
Yep, absolutely. And this is Lee's favorite event of all time. Anything that happens in Europe, that's what I'll title it. This will be the Four Seasons in Italy, 255 players. Talk to me, Lee.
I mean, I'm just jealous all these guys get to go to this tournament and they go out to dinner all together and have this huge Magic player party and eat all this delicious food. And like, it is on my bucket list of things that I would really love to do. I've never been over there, but they do 4 events a year and it always just looks like a blast. So, I caught some of the coverage on the stream. I think it's /4seasons tournaments is the Twitch link, but I believe they play 9 rounds, 8 or 9 rounds. I can't remember. Maybe it's 8 rounds. And then they cut to top 8 and then no one plays top 8 because they all just go to dinner and basically have a party after the tournament's over. And I also believe that like in between rounds 3 and 4 or whatever, they literally show up and have like pasta for lunch break, like at the tournament. Right. So, I mean, it just looks awesome. The only downside of the Four Seasons stuff is it like always takes them forever to post the deck list. So it's really difficult to figure out kind of what went on and who won and this, that. But I did see that Arceus Dota, who is a really good player. I think they live in the UK because I also saw that they played the Axion Now stuff in Modern, but they ended up at the top of the standings, 24 points on Blue Black Reanimator. Yeah, pretty standard list. Kind of just had like a sprinkling, like 1 Bowmaster, 1 Barrogoyf, 1 Fatal Push, like kind of just hedging into the mid-range plan. But he basically said on his tweet on X that he had 0 reps with the deck, didn't have a sideboard guide, borrowed the deck, and then crushed the tournament. So I was like, okay, impressive.
I hate that this deck is still good. I think it's been hit It was hit with Grief, and then it got hit with Psychic Frog, and it still seems to be really the cream of the crop of what you can be doing in Legacy, and it's so boringly. It is so boring that we're still dealing with Entomb Reanimate like 2 years later.
Dude, I totally agree. I've wanted to ban Entomb for 2 years, and I actually have like stopped going to the legacy stuff on here because, like, every time I go to play an event, I want to be competitive and win. And every time I don't play the Reanimator deck, I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice. And when I do play the Reanimator deck, everyone's tired of it and doesn't want to play against it anymore. So it's honestly crushed my drive to play legacy week in and week out because I'm just tired of playing the same thing, multiple eternal weekends in a row, playing the blue black cards over and over and over again. I really do hope they do something here at the end of March to change the format.
Well, and they probably don't even have to touch Entomb if they give us Deathrite Shaman, which is like my biggest. It is I think it's both of our number one asks for ban list Christmas, based off of what we talked about in the last episode. And I won't rehash it too much, but I think there's a lot that they could do that if they're not going to ban anything in this deck, they need to unban some really cool shit that's going to allow us to keep up with it or interact with it in a way that doesn't necessarily set us back in such a massive way. Or else it's never going to stop. I mean, it's just going to be Reanimator, Moon Stompy, and Delver, which, I mean, when Delver's the best deck, I think Legacy's really good. And I think Legacy still is good at its core, but it's solved and it's boring.
Oh man, I can't wait to play Reanimator with Deathrite Shaman in it. Perfect.
There's also that too, right? Where it's just like, oh, this is supposed to stop me, but then this is also making me better.
Yeah. I mean, we will caveat the one thing that I feel like I missed on last week's kind of BNR discussion for Legacy specifically is I think if you're going to try to maneuver the format in a position where the games can actually go past turn 4 in a meaningful way, you probably also need to do something to the Oops All Spells deck. I kind of never think about it because no one plays it here locally, but online it's like always there. And I just think, again, it's like Entomb in that it puts such a harsh constraint on how long the games can go that it's kind of miserable to play against. So I would add that as like the fourth pillar of things that I'd like to see removed in the format if I had my wish, just to give the format some more space and room to breathe.
Yeah, I think that the only thing that in the Oops All Spells deck that makes sense to me to ban, actually I guess there's two things, but one is less likely than the other. I think that they would hit Balustrade Spy in all reality, and force the deck to put in 4 copies of Beseech the Mirror so that it's a 5 mana Oops play, because you would go 4 mana, get Undercity Informer, and then 1 more mana to crack it, versus 4 mana, just win the game. That's one way. The other way, this is one I think is way less likely, is banning Thassa's Oracle, which would kind of be nice because I hate all the decks that win with Thassa's Oracle, so it would impact Oops, Doomsday, and Nadu. And there might be another deck that I'm missing, Paradigm Shift and Thought Lash, if that's top of mind. But
well, Doomsday wins with Thoracle.
Yeah, I said Doomsday, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yeah. So, and I think Doomsday's fine. I don't think Doomsday has any reason to get any collateral damage. But if they ban Balustrade Spy, I think that's a pretty significant hit to the Oops deck without killing it altogether, because you just replace Balustrade Spy with Beseech the Mirror.
I tell you what, I hadn't thought of this, but I actually think your idea of killing Thassa's Oracle is a really good one. I think that Doomsday decks are like, I think you and I think they're fine in air quotes because we're playing literally the only deck that interact with them a lot in the red-based Delver decks. All of the rest of the matchups that Doomsday has are pretty like non-interactive and not that fun. So honestly, I think that's a great idea. If they just whacked Thoracle and made everybody else figure out a different way to win, that may be another way to give everybody some room. I think that's a great idea.
Could be. The way they would go back to is Laboratory Maniac. To highlight, though, Doomsday's other matchups is Doomsday is the combo mirror breaker of decks, because you get Thoughtseize, Force of Will, and Daze in your combo deck, which is a game-ending combo deck, not a slamming Atraxa or slamming Archon of Cruelty combo deck. There's a big difference between playing a card that says win the game on it versus playing a card that might win the game.
Oh, 100%. And if you don't listen to the Dive Down, I think the guy's name is Mike on the Dive Down. He's a combo player, does a really great job of talking about these kind of decks in Legacy. And I actually subscribed to his Patreon a couple of times to kind of look at what he was working on. And he feels the same exact way. He's like, look, I want to play the fastest combo deck that has ability to play Force of Will, and he ends up on Doomsday quite a bit for that reason.
Can't blame him. Can't blame him at all. And folks like Wonder Pro are always going to push the bill further. I mean, we've seen in 2 years, Wonder Pro's played cards from Stifle, Wasteland, and Teferi, the One Ring, all sorts of just random crap. They have such a wide toolbox of cards. And like I said, I'm going to go back to my previous point. I don't think Doomsday needs to get hit, but I think that Oops All Spells needs to get hit, and there is an opportunity for collateral damage to hit the Doomsday deck.
Yep, agreed. I'll get out to play some Legacy. This week's hard for me. I have a bunch of travel, but I will try to make an effort to get out to play this Legacy this week or next, because I'm kind of getting the itch. It's been a long time since honestly, it's been a really long time since I flipped a Delver of Secrets, so I may have to do that.
You haven't flipped a new Delver of Secrets. You haven't flipped a retro Delver of Secrets, have you yet?
No, I just put them in my perfect sleeves, and I was like, man, yeah, okay, I'm ready.
Cool. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap up here. I wanted to give a big shout out to a few names that have just given us some pretty quick feedback and some long form feedback on our first episode. So I want to highlight these folks that are friends of ours and friends of the channel. That being Bo, Justice, Joel, Travis, Joe, Hans, Evan, and Josh. I might have missed a couple here and there, but we'll try and make sure that we shout out any folks that are willing to help us here on this journey. And I'll wrap there. Lee, any thoughts?
I mean, that's like 3 times more people than I thought would ever listen. So, I mean, that's amazing. Yeah, thanks to those guys. And I'll see you again next week, I guess.
Yeah, looking forward to it, man. Cheers.